Tonight we be stepping into a candlelit room in ancient China, where the walls are made of thin paper, the tea is always warm, and the crickets, well, they're not just background noise. They're your timekeepers, your alarm clocks, your late night lullaby, and your 5 a.m. Get up and start memorizing poetry, signal. Tian, the kind of place where even the bugs have a job and you probably would to survive 1 week in the scholarin lifestyle without falling asleep face first into a bamboo scroll. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is in your part of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge quietly across creaky wooden floorboards, trying not to spill your ink. The moon glows pale outside the lattice windows, filtered through mulberry paper. In the distance, someone is burning pine resin. The faintest coal smoke drifts through the window. You hear it, then that steady rhythmic chirping. Tabe. No multiple crickets. Dozens maybe. You enter the night cycle of a Tang Dynasty scholar. The scholar whose home you've stepped into is sent to some elite philosopher prince with scrolls of gold and personal tutors. Notice guy is barely scraping by, elbow deep in exam prep, hoping to pass the Imperial Civil Service exam. His name is Liu. He hasn't seen daylight in 3 weeks, and he and convinced the cricket in the lacquer box on his writing desk knows more about astronomy than he does. Liu, like many scholarly types in Tang and Song China, uses the chirping of his cricket to tell time. Not precisely, of course, these aren't our Swiss bugs, but they do follow a pattern. As the night cools, the chirps slow. Warmer night, faster. Cold morning hours, the chirps come long and slow like a sleepy metronome. And Liu's isn't too alone. In cities like Luoyang and Hangzhou, it's not uncommon to hear entire courtyards echoing with this natural chorus. These aren't wild insects hiding under the stairs. They're carefully chosen, well-fed, sometimes even named. The more melodious the cricket, the higher its worth. Historians still argue whether some scholars truly believe certain chirps enhance memory. One 10th century monk swore he passed an exam, thanks to a particularly well-toned cricket he kept under his pillow. We'll let you decide on the science behind that. Not just about utility though. Therein, something else going on, a romanticization of slowness. You see, in an era where clocks weren't yet mass-produced, time was felt, not counted, measured in incense, sticks, dripping water, and yes, in a chirp chorus of bugs. It made time flexible, lyrical, soft around the edges. Thatch in something modern alarms, swing their shrill bleating word on, tea quiet get right. The scholar's home is simple. Low furniture. Calligraphy. Arranged in neat rows. A bamboo mat. To sleep on, often unused. A clay pot holding weak tea. And in one corner, suspended just below a paper lantern, a small cage of carved sandalwood. Inside, a single cricket sings like its life depends on it. Because well they might. Some crickets were fed on a specific diet of rice flour and cabbage leaves to optimize their voice. Others, less fortunate, became soup ingredients if they underperformed. There's something oddly comforting about Liu's space. Everything has a purpose. Even the soundscape. In modern terms, you might call it intentional living. The cricket does the just tell time the anchors. The silence, yes, it rhythm. It reminds Liu that even in the darkest hours, something is alive, steady, and working. But imagine trying this at home today. Instead of setting your iPhone alarm, you raise a small insect, study its chirp patterns, and use those sonic nudges to manage your day. No snooze button. No bright blue light. Just the soft natural pacing of a creature that has no idea it's in part of your academic career. Even emperors took notice. Later dynasties, especially the Song and Ming, saw an uptick in the Bencharic arts, including special breeding, collecting, and acoustic analysis. Cricket keeping became not just a quirk of stressed-out scholars, but a full-fledged pastime, with guides and manuals written on the subject. Some were even illustrated. Imagine flipping through a scroll that reads essentially, top 10 crickets to help you study. Back in Liu's study, and pause his brush. He listens. The chirp has slowed. He knows it must be past the second watch of the night. That Chen. Roughly 1 o'clock to 3 a.m. Time to take a tea break? Or collapse? Probably both. He rolls his shoulders, careful not to knock over the inkstone. His fingers are smudged with black. Outside, another cricket starts up, this one a little off-key. Liu frowns. That one lives in the neighboring garden and has been flat for 3 nights running. Maybe it's time for a trade. But he does the leave. He just sits brush in hand, the cricket's rhythm bouncing off the walls like a lullaby etched into the architecture. This is how night stretches in a world before glowing screens, where time you stay still in the scholarin room, soaking in the layered hush. Even the air seems to move slower here, drifting gently through bamboo shutters and carrying with it the scent of damp earth and old ink. The walls are rice paper stretched taut across wooden frames, thin enough for moonlight and sound to filter in, yet just thick enough to soften the edges of the world. You don't hear neighbors shouting or ox carts clattering by, you hear crickets. Now these aren't the random background chirps you might associate with late August evenings in your backyard. No, these crickets are critically selected. Their sound is a result of careful attention and domestic artistry. In Tang Dynasty homes, the placement of a cricket wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was a design decision. Place them too far from the bed and you risk missing your wake-up chirp. Too close, you want to sleep through the night. The houses themselves help shape the experience. Traditional Chinese architecture is full of sensory balance. Rooms are arranged around central courtyards with sliding partitions that blur the boundaries between inside and outside. Cricket Chen song, bouncing off the courtyard stones and echoing through bamboo walls, becomes a form of gentle sonic architecture. You don't so much hear a cricket as live inside its music. Many homes, especially among the literati, set aside small alcoves or window sills just for cricket boxes. These boxes weren't simply wooden crates or spare clay pots. They were often works of miniature craftsmanship, made of gourd, porcelain, or hand-carved sandalwood, with ornate lattice work to let the sound travel. Some were shaped like towers, others like teapots, a few oddly enough resembled boats. And these weren't for just any crickets. Crickets were judged by tone, duration, rhythm. A deep, steady chirp was considered ideal. Thin or erratic sounds not so much. Some insects were raised on hand-fed diets of rice porridge and pear skin, which was believed to enrich their tone. A fringe belief among collectors suggested that a cricket kept near incense developed a more spiritual voice. Historians, to this day, can't agree whether that was poetry or pseudoscience. It definitely made the crickets smell nicer. You might wonder, could people just use water clocks or candle clocks? And yes, those existed. But they lack the intimacy. A water clock doesn't sing to you. A candle does to adjust its rhythm with the changing seasons. But a cricket, as autumn deepens, its chirps grow slower, more melancholy. Its voice shifts with the temperature, like nature and own metronome, adapted to your room. And herein the quiet genius of it. Chinese scholars didn't see this as primitive, they saw it as elegant, harmonious. The ideal scholar was someone who aligned his life with the rhythms of nature, not someone who fought them with gears and glass. The cricket, a scroll of calligraphy that read, "But listen, not just with your ears, but with your mind." You imagine that sentiment was tested nightly, especially during molting season, when crickets go silent for days. Not exactly ideal when you begot an early essay due and no backup insect. The sound too was gendered in an oddly poetic way. In many Tang poems, the cricket chin song was compared to a woman and sigh, or the distant hum of longing. Male crickets, all the chirping of course, but poets weren't going to let that ruin the vibe. You find verses that say things like, "But her heart echoed like the night cricket." Unfo Monk wrote a love poem to his cricket, "We do not judge." Let Chin rewind the scene. It's in late evening, the lamps are out, a scholar is finishing his last set of characters for the day. His fingers ache from hours of holding a brush. He leans back, stretches and listens. The cricket on the shelf chirps in a lazy rhythm. It's not quite slow enough yet, and still too early for bed. But give it another half hour, and the song will start to drag. Like a tired lullaby, that's when he knows sleep has come. But this was never universal. Historians still argue whether rural households or laboring classes ever relied on crickets in quite the same way. There ain't little direct evidence that farmers used insects for timekeeping. More likely it was an upper-class phenomenon. Scholars, poets, court officials, people who had the luxury to lie awake and wax poetic about bugs. That doesn't mean crickets weren't valued elsewhere. In some villages, they were seen as symbols of reincarnation, thanks to the way they emerged from underground and shed their skins. In others, they were household charms, believed to bring harmony, balance, and, oddly, fertility. There were even small temples in some regions where people offered prayers on behalf of their crickets during festival season. Imagine going to a shrine and saying, "But please bless my buck, my height." But here in this soft-lit study, all that matters is the sound, the chirp, the pulse of insect breath against a paper wall, and the subtle unspoken agreement between human and creature. I give you warmth, food, and a box with a view. You give me rhythm, order, calm. You glance around. There are no clocks ticking, no phone buzzing, no pop-up calendars screaming about deadlines, just ink on parchment. A slowly cooling teacup, and that one fateful sound whispering that time is moving, Budari and no rush. The next morning arise not with the jarring bell or the shout of a rooster, but with a slightly faster cricket chirp and a faint light pooling on the floor through paper screens. You sit up on the mat, blanket tangled at your feet, and the sounds of the household begin to emerge. Soft footsteps, boiling water, the tap of a brush against an inkstone. Liu Tao, scholar, is already awake. He'd been up for an hour, ever since his cricketian rhythm subtly shifted, quickening with the warmth of sunrise. There, no doubt, he and using this bug as a biological alarm clock, and somehow, each in working. He lights a stick of incense, not for prayer, but for timekeeping. A standard incense stick burns for about half an hour, perfect for pacing his morning reading. But the cricket remains the real master of time here, chirping with a confidence unmatched by clocks. You edge closer to his desk. There it is. The cricket box, today immortal, is a small lacquered bamboo cage, polished to a shine. Lee opens it with reverence, tips in a few grains of cooked millet, and listens as the insect munches contentedly before resuming its chirp routine. And if that sounds absurd to you, fighting breakfast to your alarm clock, Gian, worth knowing that cricket keeping was considered an art form in itself. Collectors, poets, and even minor nobles kept entire cricket cabinets, some housing dozens of individual boxes. Each was labeled with the cricketian name. Yes, many had names, and vocal attributes. Cloud song và bần midnight raven. The old belly is one. Pets, they were performers. Imagine a bug version of a Vine record collection, but where the albums pair slices and require weekly cage cleaning. Cricket boxes became status symbols. Wealthy families commissioned custom cages, some made of jade or ivory, others lacquered red with gold calligraphy. One surviving box from the Ming Dynasty even has miniature shutters, so the cricket could be kept both indoors or outdoors, depending on the desired acoustic. You can't make this up, and these weren't two idle hobbies. Cricket keeping had manuals, entire books, guides on breeding, feeding, ideal temperatures, and how to calm a particularly hyperactive bug. A 12th century text, titled The Book of Raising Crickets, included diagrams, poetry, and even compatibility charts. Two crickets should not be caged near each other due to clashing tones. We be talking astrology, level cricket, feng shui here. But the real secret. These buds were never entirely passive, while some were kept strictly for chirping, especially by scholars like Leo Overs, became involved in something a little more. Kamenetev. Enter cricket fighting. Now don't panic, Gian, not what you were picturing. This was a blood sport like Roman gladiators. In fact, crickets rarely caused serious harm to each other. The fights were more like pushing matches, often over in seconds, and were judged based on posturing, sound, and stamina. They were seasonal events. Typically in autumn when male crickets became more territorial and vocal. But even among fighting crickets, the voice still mattered most. A cricket with a deep assertive chirp was more likely to win, and to be bet on. And yes, there was betting enough that the government occasionally stepped in with warnings or restrictions. Historians still argue whether the Song dynasty's Emperor Huizong really appointed an official board cricket minister to manage his court and insect affairs. But we do know he wrote poems about his bucks and funded cricket breeding programs. Let's just say he was exactly hands-off. Liu, however, is not into cricket wrestling. He is a scholar, not a gambler. His focus is on harmony, rhythm, and study. He taps his brush to ink, then to paper, copying out passages from the Analects, all the while his cricket sings. You try to imagine using a chirping insect as your daily rhythm keeper. It seems ridiculous in the modern world. What would you do? Carry it in your pocket to time your Zoom meetings. But in this quiet candlelit room it makes a strange kind of sense. The cricket becomes more than a timer, it's a companion to your thinking. A soft metronome to your mental pace, a reminder that even the smallest creatures can create order from the chaos of time. And yet, therein are dancing. Cricket, don't do live long. A few months, usually. A scholar might bond with a bug for an entire exam season, only to bury it in a tiny matchbox-sized coffin beneath a plum tree. Some even wrote elegies for their favorite insects. One read, "By you sang when I wept, you sang when I laughed, you are silent now and so am I." Still, new seasons bring new chirps, and the boxes are cleaned out, fresh bedding laid, new bugs tested for tone and stamina. The rhythm of life, like the chirping, never really stops, it just modulates. Back at Liu and desk, the incense stick is nearly spent. That means his reading session is over. He sits back, rubs his eyes and listens one more time. The chirp is steady, not too fast, not too slow. Just right. But now you breathe deep in the rhythms of this scholar in life, the brush strokes, the incense, the steady sound of his loyal little alarm clock chirping softly from its bamboo penthouse. But being a scholar in Tang or Song Dynasty China was the all soft lantern glow and whispered insect songs. There were real stakes and real pressure. The civil service exam system, called the KSU, was famously brutal. Lifelong reputations were built or destroyed based on a few scrolls of calligraphy and how well you remembered Confucian metaphors. It was the unusual for someone to study for 20 years and still fail. Imagine giving up your youth for a chance to become a local magistrate, only to flub the section on Mencius commentary. So scholars like Liu developed serious routine. Sleep hygiene, as we call it today, was essential. Except, back then no one was talking about blue light or mattress firmness. Instead it was about balancing yin and yang, keeping one and chi steady, and aligning with nature. And yes, a cricket chirp was part of that equation. The room remained dimly lit in the evenings for a reason. Overly bright light was believed to agitate the spirit and disrupt one's ability to retain knowledge. The cricket song meanwhile acted as a grounding presence, a link to the natural order, keeping the scholaring thoughts from spiraling into anxious chaos. In fact, some scholars claim that writing essays during the deepest, slowest chirping hours of the night yielded better results, as the spirit was calmest then. And this was the mere superstition. Many believed that the resonance of sound, especially natural, repeating sounds, affected the flow of energy through the body, especially the heart and mind, so the cricket chirp was just background, ambi. It was part of the scholarly cognitive stoke. At night, Liu would burn mugwort near his sleeping mat, not for any practical reason, but because he believed it sent encouraged clarity of dreams. And nearby always was his cricket box, a living reminder of patience, rhythm, and a ticking of time in tones, not numbers. Sometimes he would write poems about it. Bad ones, admittedly. Scholars had to be competent at poetry, but not all were born by. Still, Leo tried. Within this box, a world so small yet keeps the beat that rules it all. No brass, no bell, no clock to chime, just chirps that gently measure time. Hizu finished with a sigh, then glanced at the cage to see if the cricket approved. It never did. Now, outside Liu's home, in the broader world, this practice was universal, but it was respected. If you were a scholar with a good cricket, people noticed. There are surviving accounts from Song-era diaries that mention visiting friends just to hear their particularly musical bugs. Kind of like dropping by a buddy in-house to admire their home stereo system. Except your stereo fits in a gourd and eats cabbage. One fringe tidbit. Some households reportedly bred board companion cricket, CO2 insects with complementary chirp tones, placed in adjacent cages. The goal: create harmony in the household through acoustic balance. Whether it worked is anyone's guess, but it sounds lovely in theory, also chaotic. Back in Liu's study, you notice another item by the window. A small bamboo busan funny, shaped almost like a gramophone horn. It pointed directly at the cricket cage. Scholars would use these funnels to amplify or direct the chirping, especially at night when they were trying to time their naps or meditation breaks. Think of it as nature in a white noise machine. And speaking of naps, the use swears by the burn half sleep, but not quite a full nap, not quite wakefulness. The goal is to rest the body while allowing the mind to drift lightly through memorized text. Scholars call this shadow reading, where you silently recall passages while semi-dozing with a cricket chirp guiding the pacing. It sounds like mental flashcards set to bug soundtrack. Historians still debate whether this practice had any measurable effect, but Leo is convinced. He claims he memorized the entire classic of poetry using nothing but shadow reading tea and a particularly wise cricket named Bashan. Now, as night begins to fold in again, the tea kettle hisses quietly over a charcoal stove. Liu prepares a fresh pot of chrysanthemum brew, letting the petals float in circles. He will read for another hour, perhaps two. But soon enough the cricket chin chirps will slow. He'll take that as his cue to sleep. Rolling out his woven mat, curling beside his box of melody, and trusting that when the chirping speeds up with morning warmth his body will know it's time to rise. In a world without digital reminders or endless notifications, the idea of time as music, gentle, imperfect, alive, beat strangely soothing. You imagine replacing your blaring phone alarm with a single persistent chirp? One voice in the darkness, not demanding your attention, just reminding you, things are moving. Time is passing. You are part of something slow and steady. Back in the study, the brush is rinsed, the lamp dimmed, the world fades into quiet again. Except for the familiar song that carries you into sleep. Wake again in the scholaring room, wrapped in the hushed stillness of pre-dawn. Everything is in grayscale now, light only beginning to sift through the edges of the rice paper screens. But before the sun fully peeks over the rooftops you hear it. A slight quickening of the cricket chin chirp. As if the little creature knows it's in time for tea. And it is in this world tea and crickets go hand in hand, both central to the rituals that shape a scholar at night. Liu stirs gently from his mat, rubbing the stiffness from his neck. He does the check o'clock. He does the neep too. The cricket has already whispered that the time is right. The kettle begins a slow boil as he selects his favorite Yixing teapot, earthy red, shaped like a gourd. Chrysanthemum petals today, with a touch of goji. He places the pot near the edge of the brazier, then settles cross-legged at his low table where an open scroll waits beside the cricket box. This isn't just tea time. It's in a moment of philosophical communion. The warm cup in your hands, the low hum of boiling water, and the background music of insect rhythm, they all blends into a meditative ritual. Scholars call this practice Bisenni to tea, where the sounds of the brewing process were considered as important as the flavor, and a good cricket was considered part of that auditory experience. Some even believe that a chirping cricket could refine the mind, helping tea drinkers reach deeper levels of contemplation. That's probably a stretch. Buliu isn't interested in measurable outcomes. He here for stillness, for clarity, for the quiet moment when everything clicks into place. The tea is steeped just right, the scroll glows softly in lamplight, and the chirp says Bontis is where you are supposed to be. This rhythm of tea and chirping often found its way into Tang poetry. One line written by a scholar named Wen Tingyun reads, "Steam curls like thought, cricket sings like time, a bicep, and both unravel." And while we can't be sure whether Wen really sipped tea next to a cricket box, or just like the metaphor, the image stuck, many late-night tea sessions became almost spiritual, not in a religious sense, but as a form of intimate focus, a ritual of small moments repeated with great care. Of course, sometimes things didn't go smoothly. Take for instance the infamous tea spill of the third hour, a nightly disaster. Wan Li, drowsy from study and dreaming of scallion pancakes, nods off mid-sip and tips half the pot across his table. The cricket silent, possibly judging, definitely damp. But even that becomes part of the rhythm. The cleaning, the restart, the reboiling of water, all of it adds layers to the song of the evening. Scholars believe that repetition created tranquility, and tranquility in turn sharpened focus. So when Liu says his tea and settles back in there in no frustration, but just even resumed. Tea was not the only element in this nighttime landscape. Sometimes Liu would pause his studies to write short philosophical reflections, barely a few lines long. Little quans almost. Bye-bye, particularly sleep-deprived night. He scrawled, "Bah, the cricket chirps, I look up. The cup is empty again." Simple, slightly ridiculous, possibly profound and absolutely emblematic of a scholar's life in this era. Now let you not over-romanticize it. Life was all incense and metaphors, the workload was brutal, eyesight deteriorated fast. Some scholars went half-mad from the repetition and pressure, and more than a few claimed to hear phantom crickets even after theirs had died. One famous anecdote from a Ming scholar tells of a man who spent 3 days mourning his "oh lucky chirper," convinced that its death marked the end of his study success. Historians still argue whether this account was literal or metaphorical, but knowing the times, it might well have been both. And yet these bugs endured, passed between generations, gifted between friends, even immortalized in tiny silk pouches worn around the waist, so the wearer could carry the soothing chirp into town or on journeys. Some traveling scholars packed a cricket cage along with their scrolls, insisting it helped them sleep in unfamiliar inns. Back in Lune home, the light outside is starting to brighten. The first birds begin to echo the rhythm that she'd been playing inside all night. He finishes the last of his tea. The cricket, satisfied with its contribution, slows its chirp again, lulled perhaps by the warm morning air. There is something deeply calming about this moment. The scholar and the bug perfectly sync, neither in a rush, both content to exist in a shared circle of sound and steam. And so the morning begins. Not with a bang, not with a screeching alert, but with a sip, a chirp, and a breath measured, musical and still. The days roll by in quiet rhythm. Liu continues his routine. Tea, study, writing, and those endless nights spent deciphering Confucian commentary under the watchful chirp of his six-legged roommate. You begin to understand how a cricket becomes more than a background noise. Dee becomes a partner, a mood, even a personality. But as with all delicate balances, sometimes things escalate. You see, Liu isn't the only one who keeps crickets. In fact, cricket enthusiasm sweeps through cities like Hangzhou and Kaifeng each autumn. And with it comes a peculiar sort of mania. What begins as scholarly admiration can quickly turn into an obsession bordering on national pastime. Suddenly there are rumors. Someone in the next province has a cricket that chirps in two tones. Another claims their bug sings continuously for 8 hours straight, like some kind of winged Buddhist monk. These tales travel faster than ox carts, passed along in whispers, scribbled in margins, even immortalized in questionable poetry. Sooner, elite families are sending servants out into the fields at night, nets in hand, looking for the perfect chirp. Farmers are catching and selling their finest specimens on the roadside. Schoolboys trade them behind their teachers' backs. Courtiers smuggle them in their sleeves during official banquets. And cricket boxes, they evolve from simple bamboo tubes into glorious little palaces. The wealthiest collectors have sets carved from ivory, capped in gold or made from tortoiseshell, lacquers so fine you can see your reflection next to the bug inside. Some are padded with silk. Others have tiny doors, pillows, or even miniature staircases. If the cricket might someday walk out, ring a tiny bell and announce dinner. Liu, meanwhile, starts to feel a strange pressure. His neighbors have begun boasting about their own Bontian chirpers, for one even invites him over for a listening session, where 3 guests sit in total silence as a cricket performs from within a mother-of-pearl cage. Daring wine, roasted chestnuts, and the teeniest bronze gong someone rings to signal the end of the bird concert. You can't help but smile. What began as a practical sleep aid has now become performance art. Still resists the urge to operate. He sticks with his plain bamboo box and feeds his cricket small slices of steamed carrot. But even he admits, the acoustics of the pearl box were phenomenal. And then things take a turn. You overhear a conversation at the tea market. Someone paid 2 silver taels, enough for a month's worth of rice, for a rare but black-bell cricket, supposedly caught in the caves near Mount Tai. Another man claims his chirper once belonged to a retired magistrate, who swore it predicted rain. The whole city seems to be listening, comparing, evaluating. And where they're in status, they're in competition. And only a matter of time before cricket fighting enters the scene. Now if you were imagining a smoky underground fight club run by bucks with tiny boxing gloves, for the truth is gentler, but still a bit absurd. Male crickets are territorial. Put 2 in a small arena, and they face off. Not violently, more like 2 grandpas grumbling over who gets the last dumpling. They puff up, sing louder, push with their legs. Occasionally one gets flung out of the ring. The loser slinks off, the winner preens and chirps. These contests are quiet, precise, and oddly meditative. Spectators lean in, straining to hear the tiny changes in tone that signal dominance. One noble family is rumored to have trained a servant whose sole job was to interpret chirps, bug kekrit, whisperer if you will. And of course, betting starts. It begins modestly, some coins here, a clay teacup there. But within months fortunes change hands based on a twitch of an antenna. There are cases of court officials gambling away entire collections. A few tragic souls are said to have sold furniture, land, or even heirlooms to purchase. But a miracle, crickets, that promptly retired, never chirping again. Lee watches all of this with the mild horror of someone who owns the first iPhone and is now being asked if it has layers. He writes in his journal, "But the world has gone mad. I only wanted quiet company now. Bucks wear rose." But he can't have denied the allure. At a public garden he once watches 2 crickets in a match. The crowd is silent, the insects twitch, chirp, and lock forelegs. The atmosphere is tense. And then over, one cricket climbs the miniature ramp triumphantly. Someone bursts into tears. You start to wonder if this has gone too far. Historians still argue whether this period of cricket madness was truly widespread or confined to the upper elite. Some claim it was exaggerated by later poets. Others point to records of imperial cricket registers, complete with dates, lineage, and feeding notes, as proof that this was taken very seriously. Either way, the age of the casual cricket was ending. These insects, once soft background music for bedtime routine, had become tiny status symbols. Their voices were no longer private lullabies, but public statements. But look, but they seem to chirp, but my owner knows art, and poor Liu He just wants a nap. That night he covers his cricket box with a cloth and pours himself an extra cup of tea. He writes no poetry, he studies no text, he simply listens to the soft, unassuming chirp and lets it lull him back to the world he first fell in love with, before the markets, the matches, the madness. Just a sound in the dark? Steady, honest, ancient. The next day, Leo voiced the market entirely. Too many whispers, too much talk about eight-leg champions and butcher velocity. Instead, he stays home, tending to his study, writing character drills, sipping tepid green tea and spending just a little more time with his cricket, whom he now addresses simply as "Bonsoir, sir." Is to be clear, not a remarkable insect, his chirp is consistent, pleasant and wholly unexceptional, and that's exactly why Leo likes him. While the rest of the city grows entangled in the tangled wings of cricket prestige, Lee's home remains a little sanctuary of sound and ink and silence. But the world, as it tends to do, begins to seep in. It starts with a letter from an old classmate, Zhao, who now works in the bureaucracy down south. Zhao writes, "But dear Liu, you must come visit. We be built a cricket garden. I be heard yours has a unique mid-tone tremble. Could we breed it?" Liu reads the note twice. Breeding his cricket? Has it really come to that? He replies diplomatically, praising Zhao's hospitality, while gently declining to introduce Sir to any boy romantic opportunities. Sir, after all, is a lifelong bachelor, where so Liu assumes. Still, Zhao's mention of a cricket garden gnaws at him, and so that evening, Liu begins to read more deeply. Not just the poetry and scholarly reflections, but the manuals. There are dozens. Old volumes passed hand to hand, inked carefully, full of diagrams of wing structure, notes on bon optimal housing humidity, and even rubrics for chirp tone scoring. One author recommends whispering Confucian proverbs to the cricket at dusk to both improve its clarity. Another suggests placing the cricket beside a mirror so it may compete with itself. You can't tell if Leah is amused or horrified, possibly both. But what really draws his attention is a chapter on the cricket market. You see, in cities like Hangzhou and Kaifeng, cricket commerce is no small affair. Especially during late summer and early autumn, the streets come alive with cages, songs and bargaining. Street vendors squat beside trays of chirping gourds, tapping them lightly to demonstrate sound. Wentia merchants sell their insects from behind lacquered screens, each cricket given a pedigree, a name and a price tag that could make a nobleman blink. A few notable characters populate this underground world, but Cricket Wangba, a well-known rogue who claims he can identify any cricketian origin by smell alone. The Birnbach sisters, the twin girls, who sell chirping insects out of a carved boat docked beside the city bridge. An old fan, a man so revered that his crickets are said to chirp in iambic meter, though no one knows what that means. Li Ian neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Gua, begins bragging that his cricket, Master Plum Me, can chirp in 7 distinct rhythms. Depending on the incense blend used nearby, he invites Li over to hear it, and reluctantly, Leo goes. Master Plum cages extravagant, ivory spindles, embroidered silk cushion, a tiny bamboo shade to simulate dusk. The insect chirps exactly as you'd expect, confidently, with a slight vibrato. But Liu can't help but notice something. Hollow, or maybe that's just the acoustics of the tea house. Gua insists on showing off. They sip osmanthus wine. They listen to the cricket, and Liu begins to miss Sir. Back home he lifts the cloth cover gently. Sir chirps once hesitantly, then again more firmly. Itty not flashy, itty not refined, but itchy real. No prestige, no pressure. Just a winged creature doing what itchy done since long before scholars got involved. Historians still argue whether the commercialization of crickets led to their decline in poetic value. Some say it democratized the practice, more people owning, appreciating, and hearing the small musician. Others claim it corrupted it, turning a humble nighttime companion into a commodity judged and discarded like a used sandal. But even at the height of the bug market, there were those who resisted: quiet collectors, hermit scholars, traveling monks who carried crickets in their sleeves but never sold them. For them the cricket remained sacred, not as a symbol, but as a sound. Liu finds comfort in that thought that night. He writes, "But the world can keep its gongs and scales, mine sings in shadows, and I understand." He folds the note into a small scroll, ties it with red string, and places it beside the cricket box. Sir chirps once, then sleeps, and in the stillness that follows, Liu finally understands what he always chased. Not just knowledge or poetic fame, but rhythm. Something steady in a world always shifting. A voice in the dark, small but certain. No medals, no markets, just a song that says, "But you are here, it is night, and you are not alone." Deep, a month later now, and the season is changing. The air has shifted, cooler, drier, the kind of crispness that makes the paper walls creak at night and tea steam linger longer in the air. Even the chirping has changed. Serene tone is deeper, slower, as if he too can feel the shortening of days. This is the time scholars love most. Autumn, the season of quiet ambition. ETN when the final push for the civil exam begins, when scrolls multiply across desks, and when nature offers its most poetic backdrop with faded chrysanthemums, foggy mornings and crickets, singing like they composing elegies for the fading warmth. You notice Liu has become more introspective. His writing is slower, his walks longer. He begins rising before dawn, placing Sir in cage near the window to wake him with the light. And each morning, like a dutiful attendant, Sir begins his gentle, unassuming song. But today, Liu does something different. He opens the cage. Now this isn't too a symbolic act. He not releasing Sir into the wild in a moment of theatrical detachment. He is simply cleaning the box down routine that most cricket keepers perform with great care. He replaces the bedding with fresh mulberry leaves, wipes down the gold walls, and even hums softly as he works. Sir, for his part, is utterly uninterested in freedom. He sits on the edge of the scroll Liu uses as a worked surface and grooms his antennae like a fussy old scholar adjusting his sleeves. It's in his simple act that you see just how ritualistic the care of crickets had become. Scholars weren't out just keeping insects, they were cultivating an aesthetic, a life rhythm, like maintaining a bonsai or arranging a tea tray. Cricket keeping wasn't about power or pride, it was about daily acts of attention practiced in silence. One old proverb reads, "Hear a cricket is easy, to hear your life within it, rare." Still, the broader world pushes in. The winter exam is approaching. Liu begins writing longer, more complex essays. His study sessions stretch well into the cold evenings. Sometimes he forgets his tea, sometimes even Sir seems forgotten, left in the corner, chirping to no one. Until one night, the chirping stops. You notice it first? A strange stillness, as if the silence has weight. Liu doesn't react at first. He continues writing, focused on a paragraph about filial piety, but slowly the lack of sound creeps into his awareness. He stops, turns, and walks to the cage. Sir is still. His tiny body rests among the leaves. No movement, no song. Liu says nothing. He places the brush down. He lights a fresh stick of incense, mugwort, serene favorite. Then he sits. He does the cry. He does the mourn. He simply sits with the silence, the way one might sit beside a friend who's fallen asleep and forgotten to wake up. In the days that follow, Liu constructs a small burial box out of sandalwood and lines it with silk. He wraps Sir gently in a square of yellow cloth and places him inside. Then, under the plum tree in the courtyard, he digs a shallow hole and buries the box with a few grains of millet. There is no audience, no poetry, just the sound of wind rattling dry bamboo. Historians still argue whether these cricket burials were symbolic or sincere. Some say they were simply performed as poetic gesture to mark the end of a season. Others believe scholars truly felt a connection, and that the cricket was a companion, not just a tool. Liu doesn't argue. He just tends the soil and pats it flat. That evening he writes in his journal, "He marked my hours. I wrote him none." Now the silence is the loudest part of the room. You return to the study each night expecting to hear that familiar chirp, but it doesn't come. And yet, something remains, a rhythm, a memory, a stillness that you now recognize not as emptiness but presence. Liu doesn't seek a new cricket right away. Instead, he shifts his routine. He begins writing earlier in the day. He listens to the wind through the bamboo, and occasionally you see him glance at the empty cage and smile. You realize then, the song lives on, not just in sound but in the habits it shaped, the gentle waking, the thoughtful tea, the care taken in even the smallest moments. Cricket or no, time still flows. But now Liu hears it in the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of paper, the bubbling kettle. And so do you. Time passes. The days grow shorter, the wind cooler. Crimson leaves collect along the courtyard paths, and the world softens into the muffled hush of early winter. Lei-yin days settle into a quieter rhythm now, less structured, more contemplative. He still writes, still brews tea, still walks the same stone pathways. But without serene and steady song in the background, everything seems to breathe a little more slowly. He doesn't replace the cricket. Neighbors assume he will. Even Gua, the retired teacher, stops by with a freshly caught specimen in a polished gold cage. This one has a curious double chirp, Gua insists, placing it on the desk. But sounds like wind through pine needles. It's unresolved. Liu listens politely. The cricket chirps, high, fast, almost musical. But Liu shakes his head. Too talkate. Dumb, he says softly. Gua, slightly offended, scoops up his prize and mumbles something about both not everyone appreciating nuance. He leaves the chirping fading down the lane. Ri returns to his writing, the room falling into that now familiar silence, not lonely, but full. It's the end. During these weeks that Leo starts revisiting his old journals, scroll after scroll of notes, poems, copy classics, and little mentions of Sir, scattered like breadcrumbs through the pages. Chirp slower than usual tonight. Call Fron, coming, walk before me again. Brute, vo, sung during Levi reading. Sem, unimpressed, silent tonight. I fear the end is near, and then nothing, just the usual musings on tea and exam topics. It raised strange how much one small creature had woven itself into the fabric of Len life. You might be tempted to think this whole experience, living by the rhythm of an insect, was a passing fancy, a curious historical quirk. But for Liu and many others like him, it became a form of alignment. Not just with nature, but with himself. Crickets, after all, don't too care for calendars. They chirp in tune with warmth, light, moisture. They don't stress over deadlines or dynastic appointments. Their word is simple but precise, and in listening to them, Liu learned how to listen to his own rhythms. He begins rising and sleeping without incense or song. Just the cues of the world, the angle of the sun, the quieting of birds, the curl of steam from the teapot. Even writes a short essay, but on natural time. We build clocks and schedules because we fear drift. But if we listened, truly listened, you'll find that rhythm already exists. In the wind, in our breath, in the humble cricket chirp, he does the publishing, it's just for him. And yet the practice spreads. A young neighbor begins keeping a cricket for his evening studies. A merchant 2 streets over constructs a clay enclosure with tiny sound holes, hoping to mimic Kalian bin listening chamber. Liu, amused, says nothing, but he does visit the merchant in home one evening, places an ear near the cage, and says, this one sings in late meter. Keep your writing brief. The merchant nods as if he had just heard from a prophet. Meanwhile, the cricket box, serene old home, remains on Liu's shelf, empty, untouched, but not discarded. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, he swears he hears a faint echo of chirping from it. Not literally, of course, just memory playing tricks. Historians still argue about the role these insects played in shaping study culture during the Tang and Song dynasties. Some suggest they were simply distractions, minor amusements for overworked minds. Others believe they were a foundational part of how scholars managed time, stress, and even emotion. Therein a story passed around among scholars about a man who, during a particularly brutal exam season, became so reliant on his cricket that when it died he declared it a martyr for knowledge and burned an offering scroll in its name. It's likely exaggerated, but the sentiment rings true. Back in Leon's home, things go on. Tea still steams, ink still flows. But his study now echoes with a new kind of quiet, not one filled with loss, but with balance. And you begin to realize the real genius of the cricket-keeping tradition. It wasn't about the book. It was about being attuned to something other than yourself, something smaller, quieter, but infinitely more steady. A voice that said, "But slow down. Notice this moment. Let go." Sir may be gone, but his legacy lingers in every deliberate movement, every brushstroke that doesn't to rush, every deep breath taken before the next line is written. And Liu, he is not just a scholar now, he is a listener, and that may be the highest form of wisdom there is. Winter arrives fully now. The last of the chrysanthemums have withered, and frost appears in delicate lace across the courtyard tiles each morning. Liu ink freezes. If left too close to the window, his breath fogs gently as he lifts the teapot, and in this hush of cold and stillness, even the streets outside fall quieter, as if the entire city is wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. The cricket box remains on its shelf, unmoved, unopened. But Leo doesn't need it anymore. He rises now not by chirps, but by intuition. The scholar in body, once governed by exams and lantern light study sessions, now follows a slower beat. There are mornings he wakes well before dawn and simply lies still listening, not for a sound, but for its absence, for the rhythm that has replaced rhythm, for the memory that has become presence. And while Sir is no longer with him, his influence lingers in every part of Lian's daily ritual. The tea is still prepared with care. Steeped precisely, poured with 2 hands, savored in 3 slow sips, the inkstone is still warm before use, the scrolls unrolled only after a breath. Liu's handwriting has become more relaxed too, less rigid, more flowing. You sense here writing now not just to impress examiners but to understand himself. Sometimes he writes haiku-like reflections. Here in one, you find tucked inside a book of Confucian ethics. Cricket is silent. But I still write to its beak memory exba. Simple, gentle, completely sincere. One night, Liu invites a few neighbors over for what he calls a bo quiet banquet. There is no music, no dancing, not even a performance. Just warm bowls of soup and a single candle at the center of the table. At one point, someone asks why it Jiang so quiet. Liu smiles. But I wanted to see if we could hear what you're missing. It's a strange thing to say. And yet the group falls into a comfortable silence, sipping ginger tea, listening to the creak of bamboo in the wind. Afterwards, someone remarks that it was the most peaceful night they've had all year. Word spreads. Others try their own quiet nights. Cricket keeping may have peaked long ago, but the spirit of it, slowness, presence, attentiveness, finds new life in these little gatherings, in the way people brew tea or write letters or listen to the wind without rushing it along. Liu never claims credit, but he does smile more when walking through town, nodding gently at passing friends. And every now and then someone slips him a small wooden box with a tiny insect inside, just in case he wants company again. He always thanks them, always listens carefully to the chirp, and then always passes the cricket along to a curious child nearby. His cricket-keeping days are over, but the knowledge, the stillness, the rhythm, they be rooted deeply into who he is now. Historians still debate how much influence these practices had on Chinese scholarly culture. Some say the crickets merely marked time. Others argue they changed it, taught men like Liu how to see themselves as part of a greater, quieter flow. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. As for Liu, he no longer interested in historical analysis. He lived the story. He heard the chirp, felt the silence, and now am part of a rhythm that doesn't need insects or incense, or even scrolls to carry it forward. One final note. In the spring, long after winter is gone and the plum trees have begun to bloom again, Liu is seen in his courtyard, standing beside the spot where Sir is buried. He doesn't say anything, just stands for a moment, arms folded inside his sleeves, listening. And if you lean in close enough, you might hear it too, not the chirp of a cricket, but something deeper. The sound of someone fully present. Steady at peace. And now, with our journey winding to a close, I want you to gently lean into the quiet we've created together. Let the sounds and scents of Lin world fade into soft memory. Lantern glow dimming, ink drying, tea cooling in the cup, and the faint whisper of wings no longer there, but never truly gone. Feel the gentle hush of the study settling around you, where every scroll has been read, every brush cleaned, and the night presses softly against the paper screens. You were not in ancient China anymore, not entirely. Well, a part of you has learned its pace. But chirping might have stopped, but its rhythm remains in your breath, your heartbeat, in the way your thoughts now drift a little more slowly, more kindly, like falling snow. The cricket was never just a timekeeper. It was an invitation. To listen. To slow down. To be here. So take one last deep breath with me, in and out, slow and soft. Know that this quiet doesn't end when the story does. It's something you can return to anytime just by remembering a bamboo box, a sleeping scholar, and the sound of one tiny voice singing in the dark. You made it all the way here. And now, it's time to rest. Sleep well, friend.